So, good evening, folks. My name is Phil Gallagher. I run Thraben University, a site for legacy death and taxes. Today we're going to be talking shop. And I need to mute myself on my own channel there. I'm kind of in the middle of a league that I'm recording for daily D&T, and I didn't get a chance to finish, if I'm being completely honest with you. So rather than stream some more legacy today, I wanted to actually look at some of the data that we've been getting from recent compilations that various people have done, as well as take a look at some deck lists and talk about the things that I am thinking about moving forward into GP Atlanta, which is like right around the corner. You know, we're 2 weeks out from that. So not a lot of testing time left. The first thing I want to do is look at some data that Bob Wong compiled, and it's sort of presented in two little pieces here. So the first piece is sort of a metagame breakdown, where we get to go and take a look at sort of like what archetypes are doing well, how much they are represented. So it's kind of sorted into three overall categories here. You have the combo stuff over here, you have sort of the aggro stuff over here, and the control stuff kind of over here. You kind of have to like force some of this stuff into one category or another, so like it's not exactly perfect, but it gives you the general idea. So as far as the aggressive decks go, Rug Delver and Moon Stompy are the most popular, with Rug Delver being 12% of the metagame, which is the biggest sort of like chunk of anything right now in the format. So going into GP Atlanta, Rug Delver should be public enemy number one. It should be the thing that you're looking to beat. You should make many of your main deck and sideboard considerations sort of like in respect of what's going on there. So that's maybe the biggest takeaway, is Rug Delver is not quite, but almost twice as popular as any of the other most popular decks, with the exception of like various Moon Stompy decks. So looking at the control stuff over here, what's really interesting is that if you ask people maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, like, is Grixis Control or 4-color Control like a good deck in Legacy, the answer for a little while there was, yeah, it certainly was. And then the tides kind of changed. If you look at how much this is like being played right now, it's a relatively small number. Like, for a while there, that like Renin 6, 3 to 4 color pile, maybe featuring like Arkham's Astrolabe, was just absolutely everywhere. And it's falling off the map a little bit. And we're seeing a slight resurgence of some of the blue-white decks, with I think Stoneblade being much better positioned than Miracles is. Maybe one of the most interesting statistics on this entire little chart here is actually that combo is more popular than either like aggro or control right now, which is very much usually not the case. Combo is very much present in Legacy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is more popular than other archetypes. Like you always get some Amp, some Sneak and Show, some Reanimator, and 2 or 3 other flavor of the month combo decks. But for like the combo percentage to be greater than the control or like the Delver percentage, that's a pretty big deal. That's kind of an indication that it is relatively well positioned right now. Going and looking at this data in a slightly different way, we can kind of see some overall trends of things that are popular right now. What surprised me is that Merit Lodge decks are more popular than Grizzlebrand decks right now. And maybe that's the first time that that's happened in recent memory. Like, I can't think of a time in the last couple of years where I expected to play against Merit Lodge more than Grizzlebrand. So that's very, very, very telling. Otherwise here, we can kind of see what I would call maybe equal representation of a lot of different things in the format. Like if you look at like the degenerate stuff versus the stuff that stops the degenerate, it's around the same percentage, right? Like we have about 15% of Chalice, and for like any one of these, degenerate archetypes, it's kind of on par with a major deck that is going and trying to stop them. So that's kind of a cool statistic. And if you like lump the Chalice and Thalias together for like 20% of the metagame, that's kind of, 2/3 of your like combo metagame. So that's cool. Feels like we have a pretty healthy balance of like brainstorm and non-brainstorm and anti-brainstorm decks right now. But something maybe that the data doesn't show is how polarized some of these matchups are. Something that's been coming up a lot on Reddit and Twitter in the last couple of days is how polarized some of the matchups are in Legacy right now, where like very quickly the games are decided by some unanswerable haymaker card, and that's really becoming a major part of Legacy. So, for example, you're playing against a Delver deck and the Merit Lodge gets into play. That's basically good game. You're not going to answer that. You're playing against Delver and you stick some giant sticky threat. Like Hogak was an example that Lewis CBR was talking about, I think on Twitter, maybe Facebook, where like, okay, you resolve that card and I'm not going to beat you now. Hey Daniel, hope things are going well. So similarly, when a tribal deck like Goblins or Death and Taxes or Elves gets paired against these like Wrenn and 6 plus Plague Engineer decks that are thankfully becoming a little bit less popular, those matchups become just an absolute uphill fight. And it's very hard to do anything there. So in the past, say when you go and you take a deck like Delver, you're playing that because it might be a deck that's like 55% versus the field. Now, that deck, it doesn't have quite an even spread. It might be more like, hey, I have 60% here, 55% here, 70% here, 20% here, 30% here, 57% here. There's bigger disparities in some of these matchup percentages. At least that's how people are presenting Legacy right now. And for good or bad, that may be the case right now. Looking at some data that Honorog crunched, and we don't actually get to zoom in on that. Can I zoom in on it like this? All right, is that going to be a readable size for you all, I hope? Yeah, that's totally fine. All right, so the Legacy Quarterly was this weekend, which I remembered on Sunday when I was 2 hours away from home, about 2 hours before the event started. So that was super unfortunate and totally my bad. I made weekend plans totally forgetting about this event, which I otherwise very much would have liked to play in, but, c'est la vie, so it goes. The big takeaway message from this event is that Rug Delver is relatively well positioned, to the surprise of no one, right? It's going well, Varner. Busy. I was out of town for most of the weekend, but life's good. So, like, looking at this, in 6-2 or above, we had 1, skip the Grixis Delver, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Rug Infect, okay, 7, 8, 9 copies of Rug Delver, an additional copy of Grixis Delver. And I have no idea what exactly Rug Infect is. That one I'm going to have to look up later. It's Eric's deck list, so it'll be public somewhere, I'm sure. So Rug Delver putting up very, very good numbers. A lot of times in the past, there have been these metagames where you're going and looking, and like there's 2 or 3 Delver variants that you could play, each with their advantages and disadvantages. But I think right now the question is, hey, do I want to play no bad cards Rug Delver? All right, my webcam is not working, so you're not seeing these gestures. Do I want to A, play no bad cards Rug Delver? B, do I want to play Hex Drinker Rug Delver? Or C, do I want to try to find a middle ground between those two things when I go and like construct my deck list? Rug Infect is on his Twitter, you can find it easily. Oh yeah, like Atlanta confirmed, definitely going. I booked my travel plans with Dr. Bill, so like I will be there. I don't know if I'd go so far as famous. Like within the legacy circle, yeah, I'm well known, but outside of that, I'm still a nobody. So, if you go and look at the matchup data that's presented here, you can kind of get a feel for where these decks are sort of like winning and losing things. You're a somebody to us, you matter to us. Hey, and that's why I'm here, that's why I'm doing these things. I'll also figure out what's going on with my webcam. I have a feeling the webcam is working absolutely perfectly fine, and I just need to restart Streamlabs, but, you know, I'm not going to do that now. I'm already committed to this. But Rug just makes an absolutely impressive run. So, like, again, if we scroll back and, you know, say, take a look at Jarvis's record, who took down the tournament. I'm going to pull up his deck list in a second here. But, like, a 10-1 run with Rug Delver is awesome. And there's so many runs like that. You know, up here at the 7-2s, we have 2 more Rug Delvers, plus another one that made it into the top 8 at 7-3, which, you know, would have been 7-2 going into that. Just super, super impressive run. Where's that deck list? Is that this one? That's this one. So let's go here next. When I planned out this discussion, I had like 50 billion tabs open that I wanted to talk about. So this deck list, I think, is very strong. It's a good... So what do we want against a Delver deck? Yeah, that's there. That's coming. Don't you worry. So kind of my progression right now is like, let's talk about some data. Let's look at a handful of deck lists. Then we'll transition specifically, like, what am I going to do and what am I thinking about moving towards Atlanta? So I like this deck list a lot. I think Hex Drinker is a little bit of an underrated card in Legacy. And I want to admit that I was very much wrong about this card. When I first saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of cute. Like maybe that'll see some play in like some Gaia's Cradles deck here and there, you know. But it's really expensive for what it does. And then when I saw that thing hit play in practice, it was just really hard to deal with. And oftentimes when you got to the point where you could afford to start investing in a Hex Drinker heavily, it was because you already had 3 or 4 lands in play. So over the course of 2 turns, it just turned into a, like, Baby Progenitus, or like a double-sized True Name. And that was really rough to deal with. I played against it with multiple decks. I played with it a couple of times, and I was kind of impressed by the card. I don't know that you need to go like all in on this card and play like 4 of them. Probably most specifically because of opposing Renin 6. Like, just running this thing out like on turn 1 means that you can't level it up into a 4/4 on turn 2. That would have to happen. Excuse me, that would have to happen at turn 3 at the earliest. So it's maybe something you don't want a ton of copies of, but I think having access to the card is pretty good. I'm still a little bit unsure whether Fiery Islet is actually better than Lonely Sandbar. Like, both of them have their advantages. I have a feeling that I would be the sort of person to register Lonely Sandbar, just because it doesn't take up your land drop every turn to go and draw a card. But there's very real arguments for both of those cards. And this tapping for red when you're wanting to go and hit green-red on turn 2 is very much a real thing. So like if you play this, you actually get to treat it like a land, which you don't get to do for Lonely Sandbar. Just kind of talking about this deck list a little more. This deck list is very sort of like sleek and sexy in that there's not a lot of fat here. There's not a lot of cards that are going to be bad and situational. Like Spell Snare, I think, is a very, very good card in the format right now, given like the 2-drops that people are trying to play: Wrenn and 6, Vampire Hexmage, Arcanist, Tarmogoyf, Stoneforge Mystic, maybe not the best example right now, but Stoneblade is still popular. It's not like Death Taxes is going anywhere. That deck's still around. It's having some trouble, but it's still around. So all in all, I'm really liking this main deck. The sideboard, obviously, you've got some wiggle room in what you want to do with it, but like you're basically very, very heavy on the 1-ofs, which makes sense. Your cantrips are very good in this sort of deck, since you get to go and use them to actually find spells, rather than just to try and make your land drops. So that makes running more, like, situationally great, but narrow cards. So, you also get a little bit of utility in that, like, you can, like, get this whole, like, Crop Rot Caracas or, like, Crop Rot Wasteland thing, which is, like, has some amount of value with Wrenn and 6 there. I really don't like the crop rotation in the main deck. I just don't think that's worth a slot. But as a sideboard card, I can kind of see it. This does, the crop rotation and Caracas, like, 2-card sideboard package does give you, like, a way to go and answer a Merit Lodge. When otherwise, like, you have, like, maybe a Vapor Snag. And there's a Jace in this list, which is big for a Delver deck. But maybe not bad. Like, the whole, like, Jace, Wrenn, and 6 combo is very, very good together. Extremely potent. MTG top 8, I love you. You're a little slow sometimes. Alright. So if we just kind of otherwise generally go and look at some numbers here. This is the last 2 months of data all compiled together. It has like Rug Delver separated from other types of Delver here. And there's always a little bit of like ambiguity and user error in how these things are categorized. But we see Delver, you know, sitting at a good share of the metagame. I think many of the blue-red Delver finishes are older rather than newer. Yeah, this was the big thing that I wanted to talk about here, is how prevalent Dark Depths is relative to where it used to be. You know, it used to be that, you know, when you go to a tournament, the people who are playing Dark Depths combo are the people who have always been playing Dark Depths combo. You know, you have people like Negator77, who's been on Depths forever, you know, going and sort of like jamming that deck. But now you see Depths as something people are really considering as a deck to just pick up and play because of its positioning. The Delver decks have some wiggle room against you in that, like, Wrenn and 6 Wasteland Recursion is very good. But otherwise, they don't particularly answer your stuff well, especially if you can just, like, do it without using the stack. So now we have to think about, what do all of these changes to the metagame mean for someone who wants to go and play Death and Taxes for the GP? Number one, I think you have to be prepared to just dodge some bad matchups. Like if you just draw the short straw and you get paired against like the Wrenn and 6, Plague Engineer, Grixis to 4-color control decks, like, it's not your tournament. I'm sorry, you tried. I think that's something you just have to accept going in there. I don't know that you can realistically hope to consistently beat those decks. You can do things to try, but I think that's not the best approach. So I think you should go and build your deck in a way that allows you to beat the most common decks that we're expecting to see. So, like, the big things that I'm keeping in mind, like, the biggest are certainly Rug Delver and then Dark Depths. But Phil, we don't like that answer. Yeah, but it's where we got to be. It was kind of the same thing for GP Richmond, right? So there it was. Graceless Control is better in that matchup than D&T by quite a bit. We've got like Chalices and Cataclysms to go and fight against it, but it's going to be an uphill battle. And if you get paired against that, it's going to be a hard match. I think it's like that again, but probably worse. So I think you want to make your deck building decisions in a way that allows you to do well against Rug Delver, because Rug Delver is probably going to be the most popular deck of the tournament. So now let's pull up a Moto window. So Coke MTG got 16th place in the Legacy Quarterly with this deck list. And I want to just kind of look at the main deck here, because it is a single card off from my own main deck. Like, discounting the plane versus snow-covered plane split, because, you know, that is what it is. The only difference in our deck, the only difference between our two deck lists is that I was playing one Cavern of Souls in the main deck, whereas he was playing one more planes. That was it. Otherwise, we had the identical main deck 60. I really didn't want to be playing Giver of Runes. I did not. Mother of Runes is so much better in a vacuum. But, like, after bashing my head against matches for a while, I decided the Mother of Runes effect is really important for the Rug Delver matchup. It gives you insulation versus removal. It, like the bolts and the Wrenn and 6, it lets you potentially not trade with their creatures. It just gives you a lot of power in the matchup that you otherwise might not have. And you lose some of that if you're playing Mom, especially when you're on the draw. So begrudgingly, I'm on Giver of Runes now rather than Mother of Runes. Which, when I saw that card printed, Giver of Runes was unplayable in my mind. But here we are in this wacky, warped metagame world where Giver is probably better than Mom right now. In terms of like metagame percentages and why like part of this is, Mother of Runes is going to be much better against your decks that have multiple pieces of removal. So against something like Miracles, where your opponent can just like Swords to Plowshares, Giver of Runes, Snapcaster, Swords to Plowshares, the other thing, Giver of Runes looks absolutely terrible, and Mom is just going to be much better. But against these Wrenn and 6 and Plague Engineer decks, Giver of Runes is largely going to be better. When we're looking at an expected metagame with things like, say, Rug Delver, Dark Depths combo, Ant, Reanimator, the Giver of Runes versus Mother of Runes either doesn't matter or tends to favor the Giver of Runes. There's some intricacies in, like, say, the D&T mirror of, like, Giver of Runes versus Mother of Runes, but I'm not expecting the D&T mirror to be too common come the day 2 metagame. The day 1 metagame, sure, that's probably going to be popular, but I'm not so sure about day 1. The sideboard is where there's still some wiggle room and you have some choices to make. So I think we were largely in agreement. I want to say it was 14 of 15 slots. Okay, Chris, I'll run that by again. So I think the difference was I had another Chalice of the Void where he had the Gideon. I think that was the big difference. So Giver of Runes versus Mother of Runes. It's essentially because many of our opponents are going to be playing Wrenn and 6, which has the minus ability pinging a creature for 1 damage. So in these cases, Giver of Runes having 2 toughness means it's more likely to stay around. As far as like the analogy I was making for a Miracles matchup, say your opponent has 2 pieces of removal. They can point 1 at Giver of Runes and 1 at your next creature, and they get both of them. But if you have Mother of Runes, they point 1 at one of your creatures, Mom protects, and then they point the removal spell at another creature. So Mom will always make it so that you're getting a 2-for-1 if it untaps, whereas Giver of Runes does not. So those are kind of like our 2 primary differences right now. Luckily, with Miracles, relatively speaking, on the decline, the difference between Mom and Giver there is not as pronounced. Giver of Runes does have other upsides too. Like randomly, you'll get to protect yourself from some utility land, from a piece of equipment, from a maze of it, from a random Eldrazi. Like things happen where Giver of Runes has relevant modes. It's just not enough where if the toughness wasn't relevant, that Giver would be better than Mom. So as far as changes to this deck list goes, like here's my version, which is like basically the same thing. So things that I'm thinking about that I probably won't pull the trigger on, but that I'm thinking about. Number 1, have we actually reached the point where I would like to play a Path to Exile in the main deck as a 5th main deck removal spell that costs 1 mana? Rogue Delver is going to be really popular. Depths is going to be really popular. And that might mean that there are worlds where this Path to Exile is going to be good enough that it is worth promoting 1 to the main deck. I don't think that I'm actually going to do that, but it's something that I'm thinking to myself about. If I do that, I won't play a Cavern of Souls, I'll play a Plains in that slot. Next thing I'm thinking about, do I want a 3rd Council's Judgment for the board? If we look at a deck like Rogue Delver right now, Council's Judgment is really well positioned because it can take this annoying thing off the battlefield. It's my traditional answer to True Name Nemesis, and just having more removal for things like Dreadhorde Arcanist and Tarmogoyf and even Hexdrinker to a lesser extent is pretty good. So it like really becomes a question of, are any of these cards actually going to be worse than a 3rd Council's Judgment? I wouldn't go like both play a Path to Exile in the main deck and put a 3rd Council's Judgment in the 75. But that's something that I'm sort of thinking about. If something were to get the axe there, it would probably have to be the Leon Relic Warder, and just like be prepared to make myself worse in the mirror in order to have more flexibility elsewhere. The big thing that you have to think about in making a decision like that is how is it going to affect your in-out numbers. So versus Rogue Delver, I have about 6 cards that I want to go and bring in, and I'm going to do something like junk my Revokers, junk my Palace Jailer, and then I have to cut 3 other cards that are going to be of at least okay quality. So that might look something like take out this and take out these, or maybe like leave the Prelate in and trim something else, like maybe trim a Thalia or something like that. Like you're going to have to think about, how do I want to board? And if you go up to having a 7th card here that you would want to bring in, that starts to get at a little bit of tension as far as your deck list goes. So you might even like consider alternate boarding strategies where, hey, if I'm going to play more Council's Judgments, maybe, especially when I'm on the draw, I'm going to consider something like boarding out a bunch of my Thalias, and like maybe those become my 7 cards or something like that. It's kind of food for thought, and I haven't like fully thought about all the implications of these things yet. Otherwise, I'm really liking where this deck list or where Coke MTG's deck list is at. I feel like the main deck is really solid, and I don't see myself under really any circumstances changing more than about 2 cards from the main deck before the event. No, there are 2 Tomics here. There are 2 Tomics in both of our decks. I think Tomic is very good against Depths. It is a fine card against the Delver decks as well, because it will like go and trade with a flip Delver, and it's something that can like take some early aggression on the board. This is not a card that I was super hot on when it was first spoiled, but that I've sort of come around to after it doing some absolutely ridiculous things. Oh, no worries, JD. I know how it is. So, like, takeaway messages for D&T here. You probably want to be playing all 3 Karakas. You probably want to be playing Giver of Runes. And a main deck that looks like something like this is probably where you want to be. There's going to be a little bit of wiggle room in the sideboard for how you go and construct things. But otherwise, you know, the core of, like, so I'd say this is probably the core of your sideboard right now, and you'll get some wiggle room in what to do with these slots here. But this is what I would consider like stock sideboard elements moving forward. All right. So, sort of also on the note of like current D&T talk, I was on the Leaving a Legacy podcast last week. So if you want to hear me talk about D&T and the Legacy metagame right now, Ren and 6, and a handful of jokes at the expense of the fish people, go ahead and check that out. It should be a good listen. I think it's about an hour long. I enjoyed doing it quite a bit. It was my second time on the show. So that's kind of what I want to say about Atlanta. My overall decks to beat of the tournament have not changed at all. I still think it's Ant, Dark Depths, Reanimator, Rug Delver, and Bomberman. I think those are the big decks to watch, or like decks to play if you want to do well in the tournament. But now, why don't we go and take a few minutes to talk about some sweet new spoilers. Continuing the trend of like sets continuing to print cards that are like actually good in Legacy somehow. It's going on still. I don't know how we keep doing it, but like here we are. We're gonna get like another set of cards that are gonna do things for Legacy. Giant Killer. Is that card white? Does it cost less than 15 mana? If yes, it's good in D&T. That's how it works. That's the formula. Yeah, so JD, I'm going to be going up Thursday night so that I can play in the MCQ, PTQ, barbecue, whatever they're calling them these days, the big Legacy event on Friday. So that's my plan, is like play the big event on Friday, play GP on Saturday, and hopefully Sunday as well, and then get home real late because I top 8'd and won a bunch of monies. That's the game plan. More likely, it'll probably be like do okay at the Friday event. Like, don't make day 2 because I got paired against elves playing Plague Engineer and Dark Depths combo, and then I have like some awesome horror story to tell. But we'll see how that goes. My last couple of GP runs have been pretty good. I think my last 2 were like 58th and 47th or something like that. I don't think there's GP coverage. I think that's the world that we live in now. But I'll be excited if I'm wrong. All right, so let's talk about new spoilers. So this one was, I believe, Manguchi's spoiler from today, Mystical Dispute. So essentially, if it's targeting a blue spell, it's like kind of like a red blast that costs 1 blue mana. So if you're targeting a blue spell, it's a 1 mana leak on that blue spell. So this doesn't initially look all that exciting, and it doesn't necessarily look legacy playable, but there are going to be there are going to be decks that want to play a red elemental blast or pyroblast, but can't because of color restrictions, like they don't want to be going into red. So this is going to be a card that will see some fringe legacy play because it is going to go and give an archetype that wants access to this effect the ability to interact without splashing another color. And that's pretty cool. Now, would you ever play this if you can play Red Blast? No. No. Like, the upside would be that it pitches to, like, Force of Will, but you lose the ability to just go and destroy a permanent of that color, which is a big deal. So if you could just go and play a Red Blast, you should, because it is going to blow up Jace. That's a big deal. But I see this seeing some fringe legacy play in sideboards. This card is sweet. I really like this card, Questing Beast. So in case you didn't see this one earlier, it is a sweet mythic with a lot of text. So it's a 4/4, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Haste. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So, like, basically everything in Death and Taxes. Combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. Not just it, but by creatures you control. And whenever Questing Beast deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target Planeswalker that player controls. I don't need to pick whether I attack you or the Jace. I will attack both. That's pretty strong. This has a lot of text for something at 4 mana, and I see this definitely seeing play in a lot of like the mid-rangey Green Sun Zenith decks, such as like Maverick, for example. And this card is cool in that it's going to like cause a lot of judge calls where players don't quite know the rules well enough to like know what this card is going to do. So combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. That, yeah, right? Holy Questing Beast. So this means that things like your protection or like the text of something like True Name Nemesis is not going to be relevant. So the first week or two after this card comes out, like, yeah, people are just going to be like, yeah, block with True Name Nemesis. You're like, okay, I will deal 1 damage to it and kill it. They're going to be like, Judge, please tell me that person is wrong, and it does not work that way. And it occasionally might go and like muck with some fringe strategies. Like I didn't look up the text of like Energy Field or anything like that. But I think this is gonna like get through Energy Field, right? Right. MTG. Prevent all damage dealt to you. Ha 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 ha. Combat damage you would be dealt by creatures can't be prevented. Ooh. Ooh. So this will like randomly hose some fringe strategies as well. So like this is such a great Green Sun target because like in addition to like pseudo unblockability plus Death Touch plus like multiple relevant keywords, it also gets the ability to nug Planeswalkers. It has haste, so it can go and attack immediately, which is like not the biggest thing for green. So I expect this to see play in the 4-drop slot of those decks, which is relatively crowded because you get like plenty of things from like Thrun to what is it? Rampaging Pharasodon. Is that the green dino? Or no, Shifting Ceratops. That's the one. Shifting Ceratops. Like there's all sorts of things that can slot in at the higher end of these. Vizier of the Menagerie. I think this is going to end up being a better option for a lot of those. And some of the decks, yeah, Kafigrat, that is exactly where I was going with that. And some of the green stompy decks, such as Sylvan Plug, are going to really enjoy playing this card. Like, because they get like the soul lands to ramp it out, the green suns to find it, and like True Name Nemesis is a real problem card for those decks anyway. So like this gives you something that can kind of like beat through it, which is a really big deal. So expect to see a. I don't know that I like go so far as to say a decent amount, but expect to see this card seeing some degree of like real legacy play. It is a legendary creature, which may or may not work to its benefit, given that like some random decks are playing like Crop Rotation and Caracas right now. Yeah, I mean, we don't have to go to like everything's playable in Nick Fit meme, but really though, if you're looking for a curve filler for that deck, you can do worse than this by a lot. I mean, this card on turn 2 would be kind of sick. You would need like Soul Land double Mox or like Soul Land Mox Pedal or something like that. So like yeah, it's possible turn 2, but it's going to be relatively unlikely, especially since like you'd probably want to use that time to set up like a Trinisphere or something anyway. But yeah, like theoretically can come down very quickly. Also, it's got like a weird art thing going on where it's like kind of like Cerberus and kind of like some sort of like Hydra type thing. Green Sun Dryad Arbor into Ancient Tomb, easy. Yeah, I mean that does do it pretty well. I'll give you that one. I didn't think of that off the top of my head. Then we get a really degenerate card that I looked at it and my first thought was, are you serious right now? After all of the other mistake cards that we've printed recently? Like, every time Wizards tries these like free or reduced cards, they're always like, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that again. Ah, was Delve too good? I don't know. We had to ban Treasure Cruise, and then we had to ban Dig Through Time in multiple formats, and we had to restrict it somewhere else. Maybe we shouldn't do these free and reduced cost cards. I forgot about that whole Phyrexian mana thing that caused a problem for many formats. And then we see this. So it has an ability where if it's the first spell you've cast this game, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. And then you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature or land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So why does this matter? Well, number 1, this is a card that gives you selection for free if it's in the opening hand. And if you are doing something degenerate, free spells are cool and fun. Yeah, if you're going and doing something degenerate, then the fact that this is in your opening hand giving you that advantage is huge. So the first thing that came to mind for most people when they saw this was the idea of modern Tron, where you can go and give that deck a free find a Tron land or a finisher in the top 5 cards of your library. That's kind of a big deal. And for Legacy, you've got things like the Dark Depth combos deck, which is all the rage right now. If this is in the opening hand, it can find you Dark Depths, Thespian Stage, Vampire Hexmage, a Spirit Guide if you're on a build that has that, something like Elvish Reclaimer that you can make as a turn 1 play. And it's also an instant, so like even if you're not going first, you can say, hey, before you can daze this, like, oop, once upon a time, like, ah, here we go. Like it's story time. I'm gonna find my land or my combo piece. The other thing that came to my mind as far as legacy implications go was that this is something that could go and give some degree of consistency to some degenerate all-in combo deck, such as, bad example, but such as some sort of Belcher deck where they go super light on lands, and then like this is effectively just another copy of like a Simian Spirit Guide or something like that. This card will probably do something broken somewhere. Evening, Lasco. Hope things are well. So when I'm going and looking at this card, I see a lot of potential. Now, this card is worse than many of the other free cards. Excuse me. In that it is very much a restricted free card, and that it's only free for that first turn. So basically, unless it's in your chat comment, in case you're just listening and not following along. Turn 1, Forest, Once Upon a Time, Mox, Finding Questing Beasts. Turn 2, Play Beast. Value. Remember, you do have to play the Once Upon a Time prior to your Mox, though. It takes very careful sequencing. Anyway, continuing the thought, this is going to be worse than other free cards in that it's only free or reduced on the first turn of the game, and after that, it's just a free card. But if you kind of think about like the velocity of legacy games right now and how much is going to be decided in those first couple of turns, this is pretty good. So later on in the game, like let's say, you get to turn 3 and you draw one of these, it becomes sort of like a dig deep ponder that costs a little bit too much mana. And that might be okay given like how powerful the card is if it is in your opening hand. The other thing that kind of balances that is that the Once Upon a Time, if you draw multiples in your hand, only the first one is really good. So it's not just like it's only if it's the first spell you cast. Or sorry, let me rephrase that. It's not just like you have it in your opening hand. It's like you have it in your opening hand and you have only one of them. That is like really going to make it powerful. So this might be well suited to something like a deck that has Mox Diamonds in it, where you can pitch redundant copies to it and like be totally fine with that. But again, many of your like Dark Depths decks are potentially in the position where they can do that. Although like it's oftentimes Mox Diamonds, so they can pitch lands instead. But like that's easily a change that could be made. So keep your eye on this one. The next up is a card that when I saw it, I thought it was unplayable, and then I read some comments and went, "Okay, I'm gonna listen now." So it's kind of like a demonic tutor that costs 1 more mana and gives your opponent the potential to wish for it afterwards. So why would this card be playable? Number 1, it's an artifact. Historically, when you put artifact onto an effect, it gives you an odd amount of synergy with other degenerate cards that already exist. So Bryant Cook made a post on Reddit saying, hey, we maybe shouldn't initially dismiss this without actually doing some testing of it, because there are versions of tests that are going very heavy on Mox Opal. So you can go and effectively use that to help give you Metalcraft for those Mox Opals. Like you can go like, land, Dark Ritual, this thing, Lotus Petal, Mox, tap the Mox, use it to activate this, get the card that you need, and go. There's a problem here, though, in that if you don't kill on that turn, the Wishclaw Talisman becomes a liability. So say you're playing some sort of post-sideboard game versus a control deck. Your Wishclaw Talismans would go and make something like, say, Empty the Warrens quite bad. Because your opponent can, like, use the Wish counter to go and get their, you know, zealous persecution or whatever hateful card they have, Plague Engineer, and go and use that to answer your thing. So you really only want to use Wishclaw Talisman if you have synergy with it, and you can win the turn immediately. So this might be the sort of thing where it sees play in some alternate version of Storm. You know, maybe this is the thing that goes and makes something like Bolas's Citadel more playable than it was previously. Because again, you're kind of like getting rewarded for playing all those like cheap artifacts off, and then you can use them to power this, and this helps to enable the Metalcraft. Yeah, so Blink brings up a good point, in that you can also use this in some sort of like mud deck where you can like sacrifice it or otherwise make degenerate use of it. So one of the things that was brought up very quickly was that you can use a voltaic key to untap this. So you can like play it out, pass the turn, then on your next turn, like wish, untap it with key, wish, and now you get to like Demonic Tutor for 2 cards, and your opponent will only go and get 1. Showing up late, but wanted to ask a question. How many Plague Engineer decks to predict for Atlanta? I would say if you are playing against a black deck, expect to see that thing. It's very good. But I think we are shifting slightly away from both Renin 6 and Plague Engineer decks, like the two of them coupled together. So I think, and I hope, that we are going to see less of Grixis or 4-color control and more of things like Rug Delver. I still think Plague Engineer will be there in force. It is something to prepare for if you can like make it so that like if you're playing something like Death and Taxes, so that you have a few more creatures that are going to like go and live through it. That is probably wise. But I think we're away from the absolute height of both Renin 6 and Plague Engineer together. I think we're moving away from the, hey, let's try to out mid-range each other game into the more of the, ooh, I need to dedicate some cards to combo because combo is a real thing again. Ah, you're playing elves. Well, I would wish you luck, but if I'm doing well and you're doing well, then we might meet and it'd be awkward because I'll like lose. Yeah. Renin 6 you can like potentially beat as elves, but Plague Engineer, that one's hard. Like elves, goblins, and D&T really got hit hard recently. So you feel my same pain. Yeah. So this is one of those cards where I expect some people to try and do degenerate things with this. But as far as the Storm decks go, I don't know that like more wishes has really ever been the limiting factor, because when those decks wanted to play an additional wish, they always had something like say Grim Tutor that they could go and play, which was 3 mana and like also cost you a little bit of life, so it's awkward with like the ad nauseums and whatnot. But it's not like that much worse than this, right? And like potentially has some this potentially has some upsides that doesn't, in that like you can just like play this out past the turn and then kind of go for it next turn, where you've like kind of gone and like sunk some mana into a win condition early, or you've like cast this and forced your opponent to like counter spell it before you go and actually like blow your load trying to go off. So like there's some neat things going on with this card. I don't think it's like degenerate or broken or anything, but it is interesting to me. So those are kind of the big topics that I had set aside to talk about. So just kind of recapping. Rug Delver is sort of like our best aggressive deck of the format right now, followed by Moon Stompy. Stoneblade is picking up in popularity, and really, like, maybe right now there's not necessarily like an absolute best control deck or anything like that, because many of the control decks are having trouble keeping up with some of the like value-oriented plays that decks like Rug Delver are doing. It used to be that you could just like 2-for-1 Rug Delver into Oblivion if you made it out of the early turns. Now they're keeping up better with like Arcanist and Wrenn and 6 and True Names in there that are kind of sticky and difficult to answer, and that's not necessarily true anymore. Palladian, I'll recap that, sure, no problem. Combo is picking up with Dark... I just noticed that it was labeled Hog Depths on here. With Dark Depths going and being sort of like one of the big recent winners, and Ant maybe being slightly overrepresented online as always. And again, Rug Delver went and super maybe overperformed or performed very well in our Legacy Quarterly Challenge. So those were kind of my big takeaways. And for D&T specifically, if you want to be playing D&T, play 3 Caracas, play Giver of Runes, and play a main deck 60 that looks something like this. If you're looking to download a list, Coke MTG's list is the one that I recommend as a starting point. It's just a single card off from my own main deck right now. As far as my thoughts on Free Ancient Stirrings go, it's a card to keep your eye on. It's a card that will be very good on turn 1, and then medium after that. But for your degenerate combo decks, like, being great on turn 1 is where they want to be. So expect this to see some amount of Legacy and Modern play. Maybe not like, I will build entire new archetypes around you good or anything. But, you know, if you're going all in on your Allosaurus Rider combo or something like that, you know, this can do things. So chat, this is where I want to open it up to you. What questions do you have? You know, what's on your mind going into Atlanta? What are you thinking about? What do you want to hear my opinion on? That sort of thing. Oh, so there's a good one. So what are your thoughts on Moon Stompy after playing it in a few leagues? And what version would you be on in the current meta, if you would play it at all? Okay, so it's going to take me a second to find this. But there was a really interesting deck list in the last 5.0 deck list dump. Okay, so this is very similar to the deck that I was trying to build, in that it is a Chandra Awakened Inferno Stompy deck. And this got a 5.0. I really loved Chandra Awakened Inferno a while ago, when everyone was playing like these slow, derpy control decks that were trying to like out mid-range each other. But I think we've shifted far enough away from that. This is maybe not the sort of direction that you could be you should be trending right now. But here's what I do like about this deck list. I do like that this deck list has 3 main deck ensnaring bridges, with the 4th in the sideboard with Karn to wish for it, kind of effectively giving you 7 copies of Ensnaring Bridge. I think Ensnaring Bridge is an incredibly good card right now, because it's both very good versus Rug Delver and very good against Depths. And I think when you have cards that overlap both of those categories, it's a very good place to be. So, if I was going to play Red Prison, I would be playing a version with Karn the Great Creator's 3 bridges main deck and another bridge in the board. Would I be playing the Chandra Awakened Infernos? No, I would not. So, something like this is where I was at before. I went kind of like off the deep end with Chandra's. So kind of what I would do here is trim 3 cards to go and get bridges into the main deck, and then probably keep about 2 Chandra Awakened Infernos in the sideboard for some of those matchups. So that would probably mean like junking some number of my Abrades and like maybe 1 Trinisphere. So it would go like either -3 Abrades or maybe like -3 Abrades and 1 Trinisphere or something like that to go and fit these in. It's kind of a question of like how many of these moon effects do you want to be playing and how many aggressive cards do you want to be playing. Because the other take you can make is kind of what that deck list did, where you can go and move Legion War Bosses into the sideboard and play like minus an Abrade plus 3 bridges and then plus a couple other threats other than these to round things out. I think the War Bosses and Rabble Masters are a little worse than they've been in the past. It's still very good that they can go and close out games as quickly as they do, but I think you're getting fewer just free absolute steamrolls with them, because things like Plague Engineer come down, name Goblin, and invalidate a lot of your threats. And you also have like a handful of Tarmogoyfs in the format right now, which just like stonewall the Rabble Master and eat the tokens and then smack you really hard. Tarmogoyf has always been a problem card for these sorts of deck lists. So that's why I'm very much advocating a bunch of ensnaring bridges if you do want to play this style of deck. Okay. What's your primary strategy with the deck? Is it more taxing the opponents with wastes and ports, or is it more value train to get creatures out fast? Or is that slow and steady D&T routine by basically turn 5, it's over for the opponent? Okay, so if we kind of look at the deck list right now, kind of in the metagame, there's 2 different big play styles, and it kind of depends on what you're playing against. So if you're playing against something like Rug Delver, you're looking to trade early with the opponent and then outvalue them towards the mid game. So you're looking to like 1-for-1 with Swords to Plowshares on initial threats like Delver and Tarmogoyf, and then get to this stuff at the tail end of your curve and get to like equipping that is going to outvalue your opponent. So against something like Rug or against like the other decks that you can go bigger than, you're looking to outvalue them as the game goes long. But if you're playing against something like Dark Depths or a combo deck, then the taxation is really coming first. You know, you're looking to hit with cards like Thalia, Tomic, Revoker, Port, Waste, and lock down the opponent as much as possible. Obviously, there's like role evaluation and such to go with it, but for an oversimplified statement, that's kind of where I'd say. Depending on the matchup, you want to find your role and then decide whether you're planning on outvaluing or planning on locking them down. Have you considered bringing a non-D&T deck to the GP due to the hostile meta? Yes, I briefly considered bringing Bomberman to the event, but I decided that the years of practice that I have with D&T are going to be more valuable than the metagame percentage gain that I get by playing a different deck. You know, I literally have thousands upon thousands of games with D&T under my belt. You know, I'm very confident with the deck, whereas I maybe don't even have 100 matches in with Bomberman. So, you know, there's a huge advantage for me to just stay on this deck, even though it's not super well positioned. Do you see the sorcery? 1 black, 1 creature that gets -3/-3 until end of turn. Probably just worse than the Plague Engineer, right? Oh, yeah, the sort of like super engineered plague sorcery thing. Yeah, so it's black, and 1. Choose a creature type. That creature type gets -3/-3 until the end of turn. So Charlie unequip. I don't really think that's like really playable by legacy standards, because we already have 3 mana rats that are less conditional. So for example, we already have Toxic Deluge, which can hit darn near anything at a cost. We already have some things like, say, Bantu's Last Reckoning that are slightly awkward but powerful wraths at that converted mana cost. And then we have things that are pseudo wraths already at less mana. You know, Pyroclasm, Zealous Persecution, some cards with overload like Electrickery or something like that. So I just like don't think that that's up to snuff. Plague Engineer is so good because in addition to like maybe wiping the field, wiping the field of a creature type, you also get a Death Toucher afterwards, and you get the ability to recur it with things like Culligan's Command. There's a good one. What are your thoughts on the 3 converted mana cost Thalia? That is Thalia Heretic Cathar. I think Thalia Heretic Cathar is a fine flex slot right now. It has more than 1 toughness, which is what you want. It is castable at 2 white and a color, or sorry, 1 white and 2 colorless, meaning that like if you're on an Ancient Tomb build, which I don't maybe think is correct right now, but if you are, it's something that you can power out on turn 2. It does go and provide some degree of hate versus the Wrenn and 6 decks, in that it makes lands like Fiery Islet and the fetch lands much worse. I think it's a fine choice. I think it's going to be better off in decks where you can ramp it out early. So like that would be a card that I'd realistically consider in something like Maverick, where I can play turn 1 Noble Hierarch or Dryad Arbor into that, or specifically Dryad Arbor off Green Sun. So I think that's a fine positioned card. Whether or not it's better than other options here, that's harder to say, right? I've been having some success recently with sideboarding Archon of Valor's Reach in Show and Tell, but I'm not sure that it's going to be good at a bigger event. Do you think it's worth a try, or should I just go with the tried and true? So here's what I'll say about that. If you look at 1,000 Sneak and Show lists, how many of those are going to go and have another different big cheat target in the sideboard? You often see something like, what is it? Arcane Artisan that helps cheat those creatures into play. But if you're going and cheating something into play, you really want it to just be the most degenerate things ever printed, right? So like you want to be putting in Grizzlebrand or Emrakul the vast majority of the time. So it's very rare that another big fatty sees play in the sideboard successfully. So like I can see worlds where it can be good. You know, you're playing against some combo deck, you go Show and Tell, you don't have the full combo, and you go and like put that in and you win the game. But similarly, like let's say you're playing against Ant and you go Show and Tell, Grizzlebrand. You pass the turn with the ability to draw 14 cards, you can pretty easily get into, you know, Force of Will, Force of Negation, Daze if you're playing that. Or if you go, you know, Show and Tell, Emrakul, you basically put them on a 1-turn clock. I think that's good enough that you don't need to be playing Archon of Valor's Reach. All right, chat. Other questions for me? Other things you're thinking about here? Another way to think about it is how much do you gain by playing that card versus how much do you gain by playing another sideboard slot. So, you know, how much more would you gain by playing one more piece of Graveyard Hate? How much more would you gain by playing another Blast? How much more would you gain by playing something like a Kozilek's Return, a Pithing Needle, you know? Whatever it is you're thinking about throwing in there over that slot, I feel like you'll probably gain more with whatever that other slot is. I mean, Blood Moon seems like a great card right now, with people trying to, like, recur a bunch of lands via Wrenn and 6 while playing a bunch of non-basics, and, like, people trying to go and make Dark Depths. Like, in the matchups where it's, like, very specifically about Moon, they're boarding in a bunch of, like, decays and stuff like that. But I don't necessarily know that like Adept's deck is going to be boarding in Decays versus Show and Tell. So like that Blood Moon might read like, you know, Soul Land plus a land, win target game. How often do I need to get paired versus Sneak and Show in F&M to start playing Oblivion Ring in the sideboard? I mean, it really depends on how salty you get. Because if you get real salty about it, like, it could just be once. Like, you get that one guy who's showing up with that Show and Tell deck every week, and you're like, not this week, that one guy. This week, I'm taking you down. This is kind of how our local metagame in Roanoke got like super inbred for a while. There were a handful of people who kept showing up with like these degenerate artifact decks that like if you didn't specifically hate them out, they were very good. But if you hated them out, they were unplayable. So like I was playing like a Meltdown Snapcaster Mage Meltdown deck, and we sent a message very quickly. Happy to be of help. You know, at your local metagame, you have to decide what you want to do. You know, are you going to play the 75 that you would want to play at a big event? Are you going to play the 75 that you think is going to like go and give you the best chance of winning at your local event? Or are you going to play the 75 that you're going to have fun with while ruining someone else's life? Charlie Unequipped. What I would recommend that you do if you have that problem is to sit down and actually write out a sideboard guide. I feel like a lot of people build a sideboard conceptually, like trying to understand what they want to have access to, but not thinking about the numbers. Let me pull up one of my old sideboard guides here. What do you mean I know things named sideboard in my files? I guarantee that you're wrong, because there's the sideboarding folder. So, like, here's a sideboard guide that Connor, Lomer Boy, made for 4-color loam. And it has, like, very clear in-out numbers. And when you go and you sit down and do something like this, you're going to notice how frequently am I bringing in these cards. You're going to notice what matchups do I have too many cards for. You know, do I need to change my approach to this matchup? Do I need to change how I'm sideboarding? Do I need to adjust my sideboard so that I'm not just having 10 cards for this matchup when I only want to be bringing in 5? So sitting down and actually doing the legwork like this is what is going to allow you to kind of like fix that and make it so that you're not constantly making those mistakes. For a deck like Death and Taxes that's kind of like more or less had the same sideboard core for quite some time, with some small changes, you know, like Chalice of the Void versus Aethersworn Canonist, that sort of thing. You can get pretty far by going and like copying a sideboard and like using that as a template. But it's when you start to change those things that you start to run into issues. So for example, one thing I was talking about earlier was, what if I add a Council's Judgment to this deck because I think it would be good versus Rug Delver? Well, then I'd have a 7th card to bring in for Rug Delver, and maybe I don't have 7 that I want to board out. So if you go and do a little bit extra work, you can actually go and like see how are those changes going to impact my sideboarding. And the other thing that's kind of cool about this is once you go and make one the first time, you know, you go and you copy and paste that sideboarding guide and you adjust it. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like I have 6 different versions of like a D&T sideboarding guide where each time I may have only changed 2 or 3 cards in my deck. So it's really the first time you do it that is really a ton of work, and then you have it as a resource later that you can go back and refer to. All right, last call for questions. Anything else you want to talk about? Yeah, so tangent while I give people a chance to like come up with any last questions. If you want to get better at Magic, the best thing to do is just play more games, get in more reps, and learn more. But the second best thing to do is improve your testing so that you're getting better results and making a better use of your time. So like learning how to test, learning how to sideboard, learning how to like make a sideboard map and things of that nature. Those give you a ton of benefits, like once you learn that as a skill. I played Magic for like years and years and years before I put in the legwork necessary to step up my game. So like if you just go and like look at some of the tweets that I was quoting today, you know, people like Bob and Anurag who are like really on point, great legacy players, know what they're talking about. The things that they're doing like this are A, a resource to the community, and B, a way for them to go and get an edge. By going and understanding the metagame better, understanding deck breakdowns and data better, they get a leg up over everyone else. All right, it looks like that's kind of the tail end of the questions that I'm going to get tonight. I didn't end up streaming on Saturday because I went out of town to Greensboro to play a bunch of arcade games with the girlfriend and meet up with some friends from Roanoke. So that's why there was no Saturday stream. And I didn't actually play any matches today because I'm in the middle of recording some stuff for Daily D&T that I didn't quite get finished. Real life happens sometimes. So I'll be back with some more matches soon. I've got plenty more GP testing to be doing. If you enjoyed this tonight and you're not following already, please consider following. And I'm going to go ahead and turn you over to someone else who is actually playing some games of Legacy. How about Jarvis? Looks like Jarvis is playing some Mystic Forge Combo Prison, which sounds like something awesome and fun that I would really enjoy. So good night, folks, and I hope you have a great day.